And these 4 women from the McClintock family sat down, a mom and 2 daughters, to write the Declaration of Sentiments. And one of them had the genius idea of modeling it after the Declaration of Independence. And all they did was change 2 words. They added "and women." We hold these truths to be self-evident, that men and women are created equal.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in this week. Really excited to bring you today's episode, our 6th in the Sea Change series. Our guest today is Jennifer Palmieri. Jennifer's career in politics is legendary. She served in the Bill Clinton White House, worked as President Obama's communications director, and most recently ran communications for the Hillary Clinton campaign. Shortly after that campaign, Jen published her first book, Dear Madam President, an open letter to the women who will run the world. It's fantastic, and it offers some important lessons for both women and men that we explore in today's conversation. We also chat about Jen's next book project that she is cranking away on right now. Some things I learned talking to Jen that I'd like you to consider. First, we talk about how women should engage the world differently and what that means at both the individual and the societal levels. Second, Jen has some important ideas about ambition and how that trait is viewed differently for women than it is for men. Third, she has some great advice for young women looking to change the world and make a positive impact. Finally, a little treat for those of you who listen all the way to the end. You'll get some great music tips from Jen as well. Anyway, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think that you will too. So now I bring you Jennifer Palmieri. Okay, so we're here today with Jennifer Palmieri. Jennifer, thanks for coming on the podcast.
I'm very happy to be with you, Justin.
We just had a discussion about how to correctly pronounce your last name, the Jersey version, the Mississippi version, which is where you're from. Did I get it right?
Yes, that's right. You
Okay.
did. You did.
Very good. So I guess the obvious question is, what are you doing here in Missoula?
Okay, so I love Montana. My husband works on conservation,
Okay.
natural resource issues, and so he's here doing some research, partly with the university. And I'm writing another book, and so I tagged along. But I do, I find the state fascinating. Like the history is fascinating, the labor history,
Yeah.
the government history. I think the politics here are really interesting. It's beautiful, and we're renting a house, and I want to ask the people if we can buy it because I'm ready to move to Missoula.
Awesome. Well, that's interesting because I heard you in another interview. Your primary residence is in the Chesapeake
Yes,
area, and then you referred to having a place in the mountains of New Jersey, and I just thought, okay.
So your governor, Steve Bullock, who's a good friend of mine, makes fun of me a lot about our mountain home in New Jersey. But my husband grew up in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and his dad was a police officer. And back in the days when police officers could afford to buy a second piece of property, there are beautiful, I mean, you all would call them hills, but in New Jersey they call them mountains, and lakes in New Jersey. And they built a little cabin there. And so we do spend a lot of time in the mountains of New Jersey. Yeah.
Well, now you're in the real mountains.
Yep.
And writing a book, which can be sort of a very isolating experience. Are you getting out and enjoying some of the country?
I do. I go for a very long walk every morning to kind of sort through thoughts, and usually one in the afternoon. And then, you can only write. You really can only be productive for I'll probably fuss about it for 14 hours, but I'm only actually writing for about 6. And so eventually you have to put it aside and, go out and enjoy the, sceneries and restaurants and great people here.
Sure. Although I'm doing the math here. Fussing about it for 14, writing for 6 is the 4 hours.
No, 6 is part of the 14.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
got
6
it.
is part of the 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, still, those are long days.
Yeah. It is. It's not, it is, I love it, but it is, it's a trying, it's a taxing process.
Yeah.
I love it though.
I would love to learn about your entry point into politics. I mean, you right out of college,
right,
working for, was it Leon Panetta?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, because we have so many students that, I'm educating mostly freshmen, and, they have all sorts of dreams about what they want to do, but no idea how to take that first step and how to actually go from student with no experience to actually being in what they want to be doing.
Yeah. So I think like the short answer is try to get into the center of whatever industry you're interested in, even if it's at a very junior level, right? So I was lucky in that I went to college in D.C. because I knew I wanted to study political science, and it's not a very practical major, my father assured me. And so you better be in D.C. to do it. And I interned for my congressman. My congressman happened to be Leon Panetta. It could have been a total doofus, right?
Yep.
So I'm just lucky because he went on to become Bill Clinton's chief of staff and Barack Obama's Secretary of Defense. So, but I did find that, so I tell people if you're interested in politics, like get in on the ground floor of a local race or a statewide race or a presidential, because presidentials hire tons of staff, and try to pick a job that puts you in the middle of it, even if it's not a job with a lot of prestige. I found those were the places where I really learned the most.
Okay.
Like as an example, Leon Panetta, when he became the chief of staff for Bill Clinton, I had been working for him at the budget office in a legislative affairs slot, and he wanted me to be his personal assistant in the West Wing. And I was like, I can't do that. I'm 27. I'm a professional woman. I have a serious career. I can't take an administrative job. And decided to do it. And, I was in the West Wing of the White House for 3 years, working for the White House chief of staff. I learned a ton and found that particularly when you're young, it's better to immerse yourself in the center, not worry about titles.
Okay. So something I try to advise students is whatever role you take or whatever your entry point is, make yourself indispensable.
Totally.
And so talk about that. I mean, at an entry level, you obviously... You didn't ride coattails all the way up. I mean, you made yourself indispensable. How did you approach that?
I did make myself indispensable. I mean, I was like the best intern on Capitol Hill ever. And I dived for every ball. And I don't know, I came in with an ethic. I come from a military family. My dad was in the Navy. My mom worked in and outside of the home. And that's just kind of how we were all raised. And I did make myself, I look back on it now and, I see that is what I did, and that not everyone does that. When I was 21 years old, I didn't understand that not everybody did try to make themselves indispensable. I'll tell you, I do think, there's something about women, too, that are sort of driven to that place. I think it's kind of trying to fit in. In writing the book that I'm doing now, I think about how women still feel not at home in the workplace, right?
Okay.
And it's like, you're like, well, maybe it's because for all of your life, every Saturday and Sunday, the family sit down and watch men, watch boys and men perform sports.
Yeah. These rituals
just from such a young age, all of the signals that you're sent that, you're not at the top of the line. And I think, the truth is that the professional world, we spent a very long time, thousands of years building it. And it was built by men for men. And so you're not wrong to feel not quite at home in it. It wasn't quite built for you. And I think that I know, like, for each job, I would just try to figure out, like, well, who am I supposed to be here? It's like a Rorschach test in reverse. What do they need me to be?
Sure.
And I'm going to be that person. And I think that made me very successful to a degree.
Okay.
But I kind of left parts of me behind in that, and wasn't really as thoughtful as some of my male colleagues about, like, well, what's my next step for me? Okay. I was just like glad to be there.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Sort of not along for the ride, but like
a little bit,
caught
though.
Up in it a
little bit, like, particularly when I worked in the West Wing in the White House, and I was really surprised. I worked for President Clinton. There are people who were not surprised to be there. There were people I worked with who that was part of their plan. They were going to work in a White House, and then they were going to go home and they were going to run for governor, or they were going to go home and run for mayor. And I just, I was like, then they would ask me, and they're, men that were interested in my career and wanted to be supportive. And like, well, Jennifer, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I was like, well, yeah, I don't know. Just hope you still want me around here in 5 years.
Sure.
It would be great. So it is, and that's not true for all women, but I think we're more likely to want to just fit in and serve whatever, fill whatever vacuum there is, than be deliberate about our choices of our next job or what kind of role we're going to be in that. I don't regret any of my choices. I do feel like I learned a lot from each of them, but I've gotten to the point now where I want to be much more, deliberate and take the time to sort of incorporate all these different pieces of yourself of the person you were, in a job 20 years ago, incorporate that in your life now.
Yeah, I mean, that I don't know if hesitance is the right word, or reticence, or however you want to frame it, but it aligns with what we know about, women with regard to negotiations. Mm-hmm. Sort of less likely to ask for that raise, to ask for that promotion, to assert themselves in that way. I mean, they affect the narrative you're describing seems to fit in with that.
I do. Yeah, I think that, I think now in this book I'm reading now is just that how deep these models that we hold in our heads and what we think is expected of us. But after, sort of in the middle when Me Too was really exploding in like the fall of 2017, a male friend of mine who worked for the Clinton campaign, worked for Hillary for 10 years, very progressive, good guy, la, la, la. And he said to me, he's like, gosh, it never occurred to me that women go through every day feeling fear. And I was like, what? And he said, wow, I hadn't thought that, and you thought, and it was a real eye-opener for me, because I thought, well, it had not occurred to me that men don't feel fear, right? I feel fear every day.
Yeah.
And also I think there's sort of, evolutionary, fear that's handed down for women about being hurt even, like you don't want to make a man angry in a meeting, because you like that's I will brace, right?
Sure, we're hardwired for some reactions.
And so I think that is, those are the things that I'm trying to unearth about how women experience the world differently. The good thing, I believe, is that because women have sort of come up that way, we are particularly well suited to adapt, to change, to be able to take advantage of opportunities and successes in a way that, men may not. Like, I handle disappointment well because I don't always expect things to work out for me. I'm very adaptable. I'm very astute because I've always worked hard to fit in. And what I'm trying to do now is think about, like, how do we name those skills that women have developed,
right,
and put a value on them? Because the truth is, women are remarkably, I've also, in my career, people will say, like, oh, Jennifer is a great manager. She's really great at getting things done. She's a great implementer. But I've been paying attention all along the way to learning strategy, and now I do both. Some of the guys I work with can only do one thing, right?
Right, yeah.
So I do think that while, I feel like I had, in understanding politics, it's such a man's game, I had to understand first how their minds work to understand their game, but not lose my own sense of self. And I think now that makes me particularly good at it. I think I see things that they don't see. I certainly did in 16.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. In your first book, Dear Madam President, an open letter to the women that will run the world. I read it over the weekend.
Oh.
It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice.
And excited to talk about your next book as well. But Dear Madam President is a very particular kind of book. And I guess the question I have for you is, coming off of that experience and dealing with your sister and her passing and that such emotional time, what was the thought process to that led you to write that particular type of book? Because you could have written a number of kinds of books.
Right. So I wanted to write a book that did not have a mean word about anyone in it.
Yeah, which is unique among campaign retrospectives, I would imagine.
Yes, and see if you could do that and if it would sell. And I had a sense that I wanted something positive to come out of that experience. And I just kept coming back to things I had learned from women who do hard things.
Okay.
So Hillary Clinton, woman who's done hard things. My sister who died of early onset Alzheimer's, woman who went through hard things. My friend Elizabeth Edwards, same, and that's what I just kept coming back. And that I had gone through hard things, just coming back to that. And I knew that I had learned things on the campaign trail that I had not expected to learn because I didn't think it was going to be hard to elect a woman president. And talked it over with an editor, she's a phenomenal woman, and she's like, you should turn this into a letter of advice as the first woman president. Mm-hmm. I was like, wow, you think people are going to be ready for that? Because in the fall of 2017, it didn't seem like, and she's like, yeah, by the time we get to the spring, people are ready for that.
Yeah.
So that's how it happened.
And, in that book, I guess a question I have is, you describe your experience, Elizabeth Edwards' experience, Hillary Clinton's experience, and in the context of this, all the Me Too stuff and whatnot, the conversation in the book is talking about some serious problems, but it's sort of operating at a high level. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't get into a lot of the kind of boorish behavior that men engage in with women in positions of power along the way. And you had to have seen some of that in your time in politics.
Yeah.
Did you make a choice to keep that sort of stuff out of the book? Or how would you speak to women that are thinking about how do they deal with that in their careers?
I guess I made a choice that what I saw happened after the election, there's a lot of people like me that were very disappointed in the outcome. And I thought, what are women going to think? Mm-hmm. Right? They're going to be, they're going to what are they going to think about how they are valued in this country that he was elected? And what woman is going to look at what happened to Hillary Clinton and think, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to run for office.
Right.
And then after a couple months, women went out and marched in huge numbers. And I was like, wow, they feel empowered. And that's how I felt too. I felt empowered, which was odd because you just lost. But I felt empowered because, and I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, but it's like, if that guy could be elected president, I can do anything.
Yeah.
And I think it just was confirmation for a lot of women. If that outcome can happen, we are playing by the wrong set of rules, and I'm changing the game. And so I wanted this book I wanted women to read this book, see themselves in it, see their own experience in it, and feel lifted up.
Sure.
And there are, women that have other stories to tell about how they're treated in the workplace. It's personally not been, I've been lucky that that's not been my experience. And I didn't think that was that was the book for me to write. But I really wanted to be deliberate about taking those women that did feel empowered to say, you are right to feel that way. And you are changing the world just because you're changing the way you engage in it. And, that's every woman from someone who's running for president to, a empty nester mother whose kids left and she's decided that she wants to do more in her community and she has changed that community and changed the world. Like I wanted those women to feel like this was their book.
Let's talk about that phrase you just said of changing the way women engage with the world. The first time I thought about this, or it became more clear on my radar screen, I think it was Ezra Klein did an interview with Hillary Clinton and wrote a piece afterward. And the piece was asking this question: why is it people that actually work with Hillary quite like her? And why is it that when she's a candidate, people tend not to? And thinking about that, like you've mentioned, politics is a man's game, designed by men, tends to reward some very male behaviors. And so when you're talking about how to change the way women engage with the world, whether it's politics or industry or education or whatever? What sorts of things are you thinking about?
So I do think that, I wrote a book and I said, I'm going to write a book that's going to be about politics, and it's going to be all optimistic. And I'm not going to say a mean thing about anything, and that's going to be different. And it didn't like change the world dramatically, but it changed. And it was a New York Times bestseller, and lots of women have read it. And it has, it's like, that's something I put out in the world that changed it. You go out, you've never done campaigning before, and you decide to do it. You have changed the world. And I just want like that, and to change. And if you're able to see yourself differently and what you're able to do, like, that's how this happens. This isn't about law. There are some laws that we could pass that would make things better for women. I'm like newly interested in the Equal Rights Amendment, but largely this is about what's in your own mind. And what I find, about if women had been in charge from the start, we would never have created campaigns.
Yeah.
We would never decide that the best way to pick a leader was to pit two people against each other and put them at podiums and have them it's like
these farcical debates. Yeah,
right. Like
yeah.
that's not that. So I think that is particularly, I think that's particularly why it's hard to elect a woman president. But the people love Hillary when she's not running for an office, but it's the ambition. That's what I think we have a hard time wrapping our heads around, because it is, it doesn't seem that radical, but in the scope of human history, for women to want to be in charge is still a big deal. And so, there's this thing I would always hear about Hillary and the campaign trail. We had an acronym for it, TSAHIJDL. There's something about her I just don't like.
Right. That really struck me, because I'm so interested in, I do some research on implicit bias and other sort of blind spots that we have. And that struck me as like a blind spot, coded language that means something else, even if the person articulating it is not aware.
I think they're not aware.
A bias. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're not aware. I think there is something. The way I've come to see it with Hillary is I think that she has, ever since she was a college student, she was the commencement speaker at her class, and she had an anti-war statement in her commencement speech, and she ended up on the cover of Life magazine, and she was like the female face of the baby boomer generation that was like taking on the power. And there's something, and then she was Hillary Rodham, who married Bill Clinton but didn't change her name, and he lost his governor's race.
The baking cookies comment,
baking cookies, and then she was the first lady who worked on policy. And there's something vexing. There's something like we don't know what to make of that. It's confounding. There's something about it we just don't like,
right.
There's something about her I just don't trust. And also there's a lot, a lot of women didn't vote for her. There's plenty of reasons, legitimate reasons not to, if you don't agree with her. I also think a lot of women couldn't quite relate to her. Like, I'm not as smart as her. I could never accomplish what she did. And so that doesn't, whereas in a man, we're more comfortable, we're more familiar, we're more used to seeing that. And it's something that we celebrate. And it's just, we're not there yet with women.
A New Angle is underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hey, this is Jeff Petticord, and you're listening to A New Angle.
You think women feel threatened by Hillary?
Oh, yeah, sure.
How does that work? I'm interested in this dynamic of, certainly there's discrimination, men discriminating against women, either overtly or covertly, but sometimes women don't treat each other that well either.
Gender bias isn't, gender biased.
Yeah.
So we all hold these things in our heads. So for sure, we saw a lot of women. There was something about same thing you hear from the men, something about I just don't like, something about I just don't trust. But also didn't find her candidacy something to celebrate. It was unfamiliar to them, and also I think a lot of women, would say, we do research on this, they say, like, she makes me feel bad. Like, I can't ever be as smart as her or successful as her. So this is complicated. We elected the first Black president, and so I thought that was a hard thing to do in America and way harder than electing the first woman president. And
you would think going into it, yeah.
Yeah, history about that in this country is not great.
No.
And it's just different. It's very complicated. And it's not what I expected to find.
At what point in the campaign did you feel like this was a bigger deal than you expected?
Emails.
That it just stuck around, like you couldn't get away from that story?
Do we swear on?
You can swear, have at it.
It's such bullshit. It's like, I think that issue, that there was going to be some issue in which the question about unease about a woman's ambition would be manifested, and this is what it was. And if it wasn't emails, it would have been something else.
Okay.
Like maybe the Clinton. That is like my very sincere belief. And I would go through this with reporters, and they would say like, "Well, why did she do it?" And I could tell why she did it. It's like, "Well, why did she really do it?" And I would say to them, now, if let's say Barack Obama lost the 2008 primary. Hillary Clinton was president. He was Secretary of State. He used personal email, had a personal email server. The server was like a huge obsession. It's like, well, her husband's a former president. They had a server for security reasons.
Yeah,
if your spouse had your own server, you'd probably use it too. Like, I don't get it.
And now we're seeing how commonplace it is.
It's ridiculous. So, but it's like, would you be suspicious of him? Well, no. Well, why are you suspicious of her? Well, she's always so sketchy. She's always hiding something. I'd say, listen to yourself. Like what, you are, well, going back to Whitewater. Well, Whitewater was nothing. Whitewater was nothing. They spent a long time investigating that. The New York Times will even admit that there was nothing there after they spent a long time investigating it. It's like, you are justifying your suspicions of her because you've had suspicions of her for decades. And, so it was like in the summer of 2015 where I realized, whoa, because it was like, then she needs to apologize, and she apologized, and it wasn't enough. And I was like, okay, this is like getting to like witchcraft, like witch trial,
deep conspiracy theory stuff
territory. But it was not until October of 2016 that I realized what the campaign staff had done to her, which was, I was like, oh, we have turned her into a female facsimile of the qualities we look for in a male president.
Okay.
So I was like, no wonder people think she's inauthentic.
Yeah.
You're like forcing her into this like ill-fitting suit because we had to prove she can do the job just the same. Nothing will be different. Like, we actually set out to prove that it didn't matter that she was a woman.
Right.
That was like our goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're like, well, no wonder, because you said like Ezra Klein brought up that people who work for her love her as I do. And then, and it's like, how does the caricature happen? And I think that's part of the process of the caricature is, she's instructed to behave a certain way that's not natural to her. And that, gives people the wrong impression of her. And then, it, cascades into, there's something about her I just don't like, to thousands of people chanting, lock her up. That's the continuum.
Yeah, or anywhere along that continuum. It could be just some lack of, some discomfort with a sense of inauthenticity all the way down that chain. And, in an election that is decided by small numbers of votes, that
the irrational hatred is, that's what you get. You say people like, do you really think someone who's as horrible as you believe her to be could actually exist and succeed? And, it's not, that's what really troubles me. It's like that, not that they think that about her, although like that's disturbing, but that you believe that that this country is a place where someone who, a lot of people believe she commit murder, and they
really dark thoughts,
really dark stuff, but they believe that she did that, and they believe a person like that can succeed here. And if you hold those two thoughts in your head, well, no wonder you come to some of the conclusions you do about, who to support. But that's a really dark view of our country if you think someone like that can succeed the way she did.
I'm kind of glad that wasn't in your book. Because it's pretty darn dark. Let's talk about some of the women in this cycle.
Yeah.
In this primary, some really strong women candidates, some strong male candidates as well. Is there anything that some of the female candidates are doing that you sort of see as like, okay, they're onto something? They're sort of doing this the right way?
Yeah. I think Elizabeth Warren, because she set out to say, I'm going to run a policy, and everybody's like, nobody cares about policy. And she's like, that's what I'm doing. And she did it. Yeah. And it's striking a chord, and she's doing great.
I loved her answer to the electability question just last week. Like, I'm going to win.
Then you'll see.
You'll see. I'm electable.
Yeah, that is. And I think a lot of them have that same sort of attitude. Now it's like, well, I'm just going to do it. Or Kirsten Gillibrand, I went to a good friend of mine was speaking on her behalf, and I went with her to Kirsten's announcement, and I've known her for a long time, and she was like, thank you for writing this book, Dear Madam President. She's like, I don't know if you realized it, but you wrote it for me because I am going to be the first woman president. Like Kirsten Gillibrand, like full on believes, like, and I was like, I think maybe you are, because she's awful convincing that way. And Kamala Harris is someone I've gotten to know well too, and really like her. Obviously super smart, super strong, very warm person. And I do think that each of these women, and I think they feel gratitude towards Hillary. They are able to be themselves more in a way that, like, I just don't feel like was possible for her.
Mm-hmm. Let's pivot to your new book. So you're here in Missoula, spending a lot of time writing. We did a little bit of the math of your workday earlier on. Tell us about that project and what inspired it and where you want it to go.
So it's a declaration of independence from the man's world.
Okay.
And it's written to coincide with the anniversary of suffrage, which will be next August 18th, 2020, 100 years. And I think most Americans don't appreciate that it's only been 100 years that women have the right to vote.
Yeah.
This state.
Not very long.
Isn't it amazing? Hillary Clinton's mother was born on the day that the Senate passed the 19th Amendment.
Wow.
So, and then her daughter was a Democratic almost became president of the United States, right? So that's like not like Hillary's grandmother, like Dorothy Rodham, her mother. So it's pretty recent. Obviously, this state has a great history. Jeanette Rankin, the first woman elected to Congress, and the only woman to actually be able to vote in Congress for suffrage.
Right.
Which is
we very little success for women candidates since Montana.
Yeah. I'm doing, actually, one of the things I'm doing in Missoula is I'm doing a fundraiser for Carol's List, the Carol Williams group that raises money to help women run for office. Yeah, and I've talked to Carol Williams about that in previous visits, and I know that, and she's made it a priority when she was in the Senate. I think Whitney Williams could be a candidate for governor.
Could. We had Carol and Whitney on last month, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, they are really great. But the point of the book is just for women to appreciate that it's not a declaration of war. Men are not my enemy. But that I don't see any reason for women to continue to follow a man's path and expect it to work out the same way it does for them. It's just, and it's, I've always thought I could do a job just as well as a man, but I don't want to do it the same way. I want to do it the way I want to do it. And, we keep bumping into the same glass ceilings and understand that I think we've plateaued in the man's world. My whole career, I thought it was the destination. All right. I thought and now I just see it differently. It's like, all right, we were passing through. We've learned a lot here, and modeling ourselves after, their sort of skill set and education plans. And, but find that most women who experience really big success go outside of existing power systems to do it. I'm talking like Oprah, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about some prominent examples.
Like that, so that, a lot of the women that are starting new media outlets, Reese Witherspoon with her Hello Sunshine. I'm helping a couple women who've left other media outlets to start their own, just to realize like you don't quite fit into sort of a normal corporate structure. Fortunately, there's technology exists. And educational opportunities exist that women can do that. It's still harder than it should be. But, again, it's an optimistic, as the first book, an optimistic book. But it's like for women, like, stop, you're not doing it wrong. It's just, this is not it. This is not the place for you.
Right.
You
Sort
are
of
like
playing the wrong game.
Yeah,
or the
we're
wrong
like
rules
passing.
Or...
We're just passing through. So that's the theory.
And so this is set to come out in August.
It's going to come out next spring.
Okay.
But the theory is, it's interesting. We talked a little bit before about how you can change the world by changing how you engage in it. And in the Declaration of Sentiments at Seneca Falls, that, I sort of look at these in chunks of time, and 3 women from one family sat down at their kitchen table, and they were assigned the task of drafting the Declaration of Sentiments. And this was going to be a women's convention to talk about women's rights. Whether or not they asked for suffrage was a very big controversial thing. Mm-hmm. And these 4 women from the McClintock family sat down, a mom and 2 daughters, to write the Declaration of Sentiments. And one of them had the genius idea of modeling it after the Declaration of Independence. And all they did was change 2 words. They added "and women." Mm. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that men and women are created equal. And that's the genius, right, of the document. That's the genius of these women, that they saw it is self-evident, right? I don't need to prove that I'm equal to men. It is self-evident. And that's what we're adding here. It took 72 years from that Declaration of Sentiments to when women actually got the right to vote.
Yeah.
That was 1920. 72 years more, we got to 1992, which women considered to be the year of the woman, because 6 women got elected to the United States Senate. We thought that was a big deal, yeah. Right? And now, so these things, but I wanted to honor that, like, see women, those 3 women sat down at their farm table. They're not, they didn't have any power. And they wrote this document.
Mm-hmm. They made it happen.
They made it happen, and they changed the world because they changed the way they engage with it. So that's what I want women to see. We're part of that, like, arc. You're not out there on your own.
So thinking about, the first book, the second book that you're in the midst of writing, at the University of Montana, we're engaged in the Sea Change Initiative in the lead up to March 2020. And it's something that we've been investigating in this series is how should universities be thinking about this challenge of empowering women to think of the rules of the game differently, or to imagine a different way of engaging, and whether that's programs we create or whether that's me as a professor thinking differently about my role in the classroom. Any advice? I mean, you've been around universities, been around a lot of young people trying to break in.
Yeah, and I know. I actually have known. I knew Seth and Chelsea Bodner outside of this work. Through because they were friends with Chelsea Clinton, and so I've talked a lot with the 2 of them about this, and I think that the way the things that there's, like, women can make changes in their own by what they think about themselves in their own mind, and just like trusting that, just like if we weren't meant. I do not believe that my creator would put ambition and trust in myself in my gut if I wasn't supposed to act on it, right? Like, I don't believe that. Yeah. So women should, like, when the thing that doesn't quite sit right with you, you are right. Like, at some level, you're right at the imposter syndrome because you're operating in a world that wasn't built with you in mind. But you are, because you have been doing that your whole life, you have gained enormous knowledge and skill that's very valuable. But, like, trust your confusion when you're like, this doesn't sit right with me. You're right. There's something at the root of that's probably about your gender, and you should voice it and you should act on it. I think for men, it's like, listen certainly to women and listen to yourselves. I hear a lot of times, particularly in politics, men will talk about a male prospect as a candidate, and see a lot of potential, and then a woman's got the same sort of resume and not see it in her.
Yeah.
That is a real and very big thing. It's a big thing. There's a lot of research about this. We judge men on their potential. We judge women on their record.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for people to really listen to what they say, listen to yourself and how and your own thoughts. You know, like I think about this with Beto O'Rourke.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Pete Buttigieg, two great leaders, great Democratic candidates. I was like, oh, Beto's so inspiring. And they're like, wait, what's at the root of that?
Yeah, where's that come from?
Beto's so inspiring, talking about why it's okay for NFL athletes to kneel, partly, not only, but partly because he's a white man. So when he's defending black athletes, it's selfless, it's inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
When a black candidate does that, it's not as inspiring. When a woman does it as a candidate, it's like, well, she's trying to be the first woman president. She's trying to take some power there. So it's like you just got to be really thoughtful about try to be very aware of what your own biases are.
Do you have examples of organizations or people you've worked for or with that are doing this particularly well, whether it's the way they mentor the people they work with or whether it's the way they've structured their organization and reward certain behaviors?
That's an interesting question. I think there are some in politics. There's the Barbara Lee Institute, which I think is very good on these like questions about bias and how we see them and how women can sort of help handle them. The institution that comes to mind, though, is the United States women's soccer team.
Great example.
I mean, this is here's what I see with those women. Those women saw the 1999 women's soccer team. Mm-hmm. And in 1999, the United States women won for, I think, the first time. Maybe it wasn't the first time, but they won. All of America celebrated it.
Yep.
All of America watched it. I could be mistaken. I think it's the most watched soccer game in U.S. history, the 1999
Something
game.
like that.
It's something like that.
I mean, that was the example I was thinking about when you brought up the ritual of watching men perform on Sundays.
Yeah.
Like this World Cup team, that's
the World
changing
Cup
the
team.
game.
That is. So those women, they had seen it before. They'd seen women win, and they'd seen America embrace them. And God loved this women's soccer team who also welcomed. I saw Alex Morgan be interviewed. She's like, it's so interesting because she's like, all I wanted was to be a professional soccer player, where I know women my age didn't know you could be a professional soccer player, mm-hmm. right? But Alex saw I can be a professional soccer player. And then Alex said, but I didn't appreciate, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it. I got to be a role model. I got to advocate for women in other industries. But they were like very willing to take that on. And it's like when Megan Rapinoe said, I deserve this, right? So
Yeah.
And it's like a provable fact. She did deserve this. And so, we're comfortable with it. And I just think, when women say, we get used to hearing women say, like, I deserve this accolades and other venues, that I was like, this is really inspiring to me because I was like, that's how generational change happens, and you can see it in real time with that team.
Well, you can see it in kids watching that team too. I mean, some of these things, like you mentioned before, 100 years is not that long. It feels painfully long in other ways.
Yeah.
But when I watch my daughters watch that team, or just the way they engage with my wife and I, who we both work full time, it's just some of these effects will occur over time too. I mean, they need to happen faster, but
right. But what I hope for generations like how old is your daughter?
We have 2, 9 and 7.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Exactly. 9. There's nothing more confident in the world than a 9-year-old girl.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then somewhere along the way, they taught something. It is not ingrained in them, right? Because that's not how they come into the world. So what I hope is happening now is that generation isn't going to learn.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking of that when you brought up fear, being in the world with fear, and I think about that with my daughters. Like, as a responsible, what's my responsibility as a parent? Do I need to tell them that there are situations in which they need to be afraid, or to prepare them for that.
Yeah.
Because those are some realities that you're unwise if you don't train your kids on. But at the same time, that's a big suitcase to be lugging around your whole life.
I know. But there's progress, right?
Yeah,
there's progress
absolutely.
being. But that is that's the goal. The goal is the 9-year-old girl stays that way, right? That's how you come in. That's how you came into this world.
So, your first book took you 10 weeks to write. Your second book, probably
it's longer.
But you're going to have it done before this election, 2020. Is it weird to be sort of a little bit? I wouldn't say you're on the sidelines necessarily, but what's the deal with the campaign? Are you going to sign on to one of these campaigns, or what's your plan?
I don't plan to do that. I do help people who ask for my help. It's interesting. It's weird to be in a situation where you like some of these people are my colleagues. I know almost all of them. I don't know Beto O'Rourke and I don't know Pete Buttigieg, but I think otherwise I don't know Marianne Williamson. Or Tulsi Gabbard, but otherwise I know them all. So it's it's interesting. I'm a big fan of your governor. He's a good friend of mine. I mentioned that before. I met him 2 years ago. My husband had worked with him during the Obama administration, and Jim would talk him up a lot. And I was like, I don't know, red state Democrat. A lot of times they win because they just trash the party, and then I met him and, heard about all the things that he's managed to pass in Montana, like Medicaid expansion and getting rid of dark money and a lot of great stuff on equal pay. And I was like, wait, where did you, because I met him, I said, where did you come from? He's like, oh, I'm glad the Democrats are paying such attention to Montana. But just think he's first, one of the most decent people I've ever met in politics, but also, someone who can bridge divides, which is something I worry. These are the two things I obsess about women, but then how are we going to bridge these big divides? Yeah. And so someone like Steve, who's, done a good job here doing that, and he really listens to people in a way. It's an interesting thing about Montana. I find men here listen. I feel heard and listened here in a way that I don't if I'm in Silicon Valley or New York or the super progressive places.
Interesting. I wonder what we can attribute that to.
I don't know. There's a Western. I do think that this is something I've talked to Carol Williams about, because it said, I know that Montana doesn't do great in electing women, although the state legislature has a higher average than the rest of the country. But you haven't had a statewide elected woman or since Jeanette Rankin, I guess.
Yeah, quite a while. Yeah, I think it did. Yeah,
maybe state. I'm not sure statewide, but certainly
goes way back.
Yeah, the congressional seat goes back to her. And I said, but I do feel like maybe because historically life here had been difficult, that men and women are in a partnership. There feels to be sort of a respect. And she said, she agreed with that, but she said, women need more of a push to put themselves out there to actually run, which is not unusual. But I find that here and Steve Bullock's a good example of a very good listener. Yeah, I think that's why he does well.
Speaking of listening, so kind of not engaged directly with any of these campaigns at the moment. In the meantime, you came in listening to something on your iPhone. What are you listening to on your iPhone?
It's a great question. I am obsessed. This is what I do. I travel. I'm not interested really in the coasts anymore. I've learned everything I have to learn there. So I go to places I want to visit, to see bands I want to see. I came to Missoula last year to see Jason Isbell, who's I'm a very big fan of his. I went to Tupelo, Mississippi to see him there too. I'm traveling around a bunch to see Rustin Kelly, who people may not know, but he's Casey Musgrave's husband. People do know her.
Okay.
The more famous side of that couple. But as I came in, I was listening to Ashley McBryde. Do you know her?
I do not.
She is, I just love her. She, very blue-collar country singer. She's got a great album called Girl Going Nowhere. It got nominated for a lot of Grammys, but Casey Musgraves won all of them. And it was Girl Going Nowhere. That's what I was listening to when I came in.
I thought you might say West Wing Weekly because you're such a prolific guest star on West Wing Weekly. I love those guys.
Those guys. Yeah, I go on that occasionally. I worked in West Wings for a long time, so they do find that I have a good knowledge.
You're relevant. You have a lot of relevant expertise
for that show, and that show only. But yeah.
Well, Jen, I really find your expertise relevant not only to that show, but to our audience, to what we're doing here at the University of Montana and all around the country. I think about it as an educator, but also as a father, and can't thank you enough for coming on and for the work you're doing.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure.
All right, that was super fun. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Check out Dear Madam President and be on the lookout for Jen's next book coming out next spring. All right, coming up next week, we have Nora Sachs, creator and host of the award-winning Richest Hill podcast. If you're interested in Montana's history of mining and what it means for the state and its people today, tune in next week. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a gift from University of Montana alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. And remember that A New Angle is supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you would ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps. Executive producer Stefan Borsum and interns Aspen Runkle and Max Gibson. Huge thanks to VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks for the tunes. And finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word. Be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.